From the early 18th century, there has been only one place in Rome where anyone, not Catholic, could be interred. That place is the non-Catholic cemetery, a piece of ground nestled inside the city's Aurelian walls and under the shadow of the pyramid of Caius Cestius. According to the laws of the Church, non-Catholics could not be buried in consecrated ground. Until the 18th century, those who died in Rome were likely to be interred with the dregs and outcasts of society, in a kind of potter's field. But with the arrival of large numbers of foreign visitors of varying faiths, and a corresponding increase in the number of deaths, some accommodation had to be made. And finally, a parcel of ground was set aside.
This cemetery is most commonly known as the Protestant Cemetery here in Rome, but the real name should be the non-Catholic cemetery.
The first known remains date to 1738.
At maps of the early 18th century, you will see this area designated as the Cemetery of Protestants. This was an uninhabited area. The earliest documents mention this place as a pasturing ground with gravestones in it.
To avoid jeering crowds and other anti-Protestant sentiment, funerals had to take place at night. Today, perhaps as many as 4,000 people rest within the confines of the Protestant cemetery. But they are not all Protestants. This is actually the final resting place of people of almost any persuasion. Here are buried Jews and Muslims as well as Christians, Buddhists, Confucians, Zoroastrians, communists, atheists. All share quietly the earth they could not share peacefully. Perhaps the two best-known graves in the cemetery belong to English poets Percy Shelley and John Keats. Shelley's infant son William died in Rome in 1819 and was buried in the non-Catholic cemetery. Shelley would say of the place just prior to his own death and burial there, "It might make one in love with death to be buried in so sweet a place." Shelley's compatriot, John Keats, seeking a rest cure for the tuberculosis that would soon take his life, came to Rome with his friend Joseph Severn.
Keats came to Rome because it was commonly thought that a warm climate would help cure what really essentially was an incurable illness. He had tuberculosis. He certainly realized he was doomed, but he thought perhaps a warmer climate would help him. So he took lodgings in the Piazza di Spagna in what was then a rooming house, and which is now the Keats Shelley Memorial House, a museum to Keats and to the other Romantic poets.
Keats went out a little bit in his first days in Rome, but on the 10th of December 1820, he had a massive hemorrhage and he didn't leave the room where I am now again. He was confined to bed. He would have looked out of the windows here. When the non-Catholic cemetery was described to him, he never saw the place where he was to be buried. He looked up at the ceiling and said, "I feel the flowers growing over me already." His condition continued to deteriorate. He became weaker to such a degree that he himself recognized that he was in his last hours.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain.
Joseph Severn wrote a series of anguished letters, and he describes the last moments of Keats's life. He called to his dozing friend at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. "Lift me up, for I am dying. I shall die easy, don't be frightened. Thank God it has come."
Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone, and think till love and fame to nothingness do sink.
His last moments were so peaceful that Joseph Severn felt he'd gone to sleep and didn't immediately realise what had happened. Keats asked for a particular inscription on his headstone. He wanted the words, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water," on his stone. Many people have asked and debated and discussed the origin of that phrase. For me, the most important thing is that it is in fact a line of poetry. It's a line of pentameter, and I tend to look on it as the last line of poetry that he ever wrote.
The house at 26 Piazza di Spagna is maintained today much as it was, and its folklore is inevitably linked with that of the cemetery. So is its fate. Over time, the cemetery itself became a place of pilgrimage.
Around Shelley's grave are many other interesting graves, and in a way it reminds me of the tombs of saints in late antiquity, when wherever a saint was buried in a church, important people would like to always be buried around the saint. There was a kind of a sanctity about it. And there were many admirers of Shelley who were buried up there. For example, the wife of William Wetmore Story, the famous American sculptor, is up near Shelley. The beat poet Gregory Corso is also buried near Shelley because he was an admirer of Shelley. This cemetery is so full of artists and poets and musicians.
Rome has ever been the magnet for travelers, and especially artists. Writers, poets, sculptors, painters have come here in search of inspiration. Many have never left.
Till the spirit of the spot shall lead thy footsteps.
Thou art young and lovely, built not thereon. For she who sleeps in death under thy feet.
I would have taken the page breathing in the ground. For no evidence have I run.
I am watching them cheering the last milk they'll ever get from me.
The summer evening's shimmering farewell to the dying day.
And in the icy silence
Fair
of the
garden,
tomb,
whither the
haunt thy days and chill thy dreaming nights.
Name was writ in water, it shall stand, and tears like mine will keep thy memory green.
But behind the beauty and serenity of the place that Oscar Wilde called the holiest place in Rome, all is not well.
We have many beautiful old pine trees in the cemetery which add to its lovely character. However, look what happened here. A large limb fell very unexpectedly last week, and it has slightly damaged some of the graves.
In 2006, the World Monument Fund nominated the non-Catholic cemetery to its list of the 100 most endangered sites.
Most of the tombs in the cemetery are made of marble, or of travertine, which is a kind of banded limestone, or of granite, and several other types of rocks. So one might think that they are very durable and they will last forever. That is true up to a point, but not entirely true because of the particular conditions of the cemetery. And there are various factors which are going to cause the graves to be damaged, show deterioration after a certain length of time. So we can take a walk up one of these paths and look at some of the examples of graves which have already got some problems to them, and you could say in some ways they all add to the kind of romantic atmosphere of the cemetery. But sometimes what appears to be attractive and romantic at the moment, with time becomes a serious problem. Maybe we can just look at this grave over here for a moment. There's really a lot of growth of moss all around the base, and that with time is going to cause problems because there can be acids, say, within the moss, acids in the water which the moss retains, and that can be slowly eating away on the stone. Several tombs are made of composite materials where you have these bronze figures, and as we all know that bronze soon turns to dark green, black color, exposed to the weather, exposed to the rain and so on.
Pollution, decay, and past neglect have all taken their toll on the cemetery. Monuments are deteriorating, and a recent survey estimated that as many as 50% of the graves are in need of conservation work.
That looks like it's been mended. Often when we're talking about conservation of monuments and conservation in general, the most obvious cause that people think of is simply damage, physical damage where you see something is missing. And this is one of the examples in the cemetery where clearly the lady has lost her head. The atmosphere in the cemetery too is of polluted air, and the gases in that air can interact with moisture, with rain and so on, and they help even to attack the marble and the limestone of the tombstones.
Please, help us preserve the non-Catholic cemetery for future generations. It is a hidden gem in mankind's cultural legacy, and today its survival hangs in the balance. To implement the kind of long-term care and conservation it needs requires resources far beyond what is currently available. All funds go to stone conservation, landscape gardening, visitor aids, and essential maintenance. Please, help us preserve so sweet a place so that it may continue through the years ahead to spin its enchantments over the pilgrims who seek it.